You are live.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first session of Friday. Glad you all can make it. I'm going to talk about a project called Urban Reviewer that I worked on last summer. As already mentioned, my name is Eric Brelsford. You might have seen this 100 times earlier when we were testing the slides. I'm a freelance programmer and map maker. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. I work on a lot of websites that include maps and geodata. If you're into that Twitter thing, that's how you find me on Twitter. So I work on a project called 596 Acres. We map public vacant land in New York City. There's more than you would expect, more than anyone expects. And this statement isn't true anymore, but we thought it was true when we made the poster. It's actually a lot less than that, but we blame the city for that. So we make maps, and we hang them on chain link fences. We make a website also, but this is a bulk of what we do. We post the maps on chain link fences, letting people in the neighborhood know that that piece of land is vacant and owned by the city. So in the middle there, I have a laser pointer. In the middle there's the contact information for the person at the city agency that controls that piece of land. So you can actually call them up at their desk and say, hey, this has been vacant for a while. What's going on with that? Can I start a project there? And that works more often than you'd expect. So in the summer of 2012, we were in the Rockaways in Queens, actually just before Sandy. And we were hanging signs on vacant lots. There are a whole lot of them in the Rockaways. And we stumbled upon this piece of land. It's, as you can see, it's got chain link fence all around it. And we hung our signs on it. We recognized that one of them was owned by the Parks Department, and the Parks Department owning vacant land, usually you can force them into opening up that land because they're the Parks Department. So we wrote this on the poster. We got home later and we saw on Google Maps that it's actually mapped as a park. It's very much not a park. It doesn't have a gate. It's not marked as a park in public. Nobody's ever in it. And also we noticed that the name of this park is Edgemere Urban Renewal Park. And that's kind of where we got started thinking about urban renewal as a project. So we had run into other vacant lots in our travels around the city that were vacant because of urban renewal, but this was definitely the most interesting one. So what is urban renewal? In New York City, urban renewal and Robert Moses are synonymous, pretty much. Urban renewal was used as a reason to clear out neighborhoods that were deemed undesirable. This kind of happened all over the US. Happened in New York City a whole lot. And basically you would go from an area that looks like this, which I know it's pretty low res, but you can kind of see houses in here, right? There's something going on, people live there. That's what it looks like today. Due to urban renewal back in the 60s and 70s, this was cleared out. People who lived there were kicked out, and the land has just been sitting there vacant. And this is in New York City. So these are actually some of the plots that we were putting signs on. You can see that it's kind of reforested. Go away. Cool. And that's what it looks like when you're actually standing there, not from aerial view. You can see streets, even a fire hydrant, street signs, but there's no city there anymore. That's not just in the far out parts of New York City. This is in the Lower East Side, one of the more desirable areas. This land was cleared out in the 60s and 70s. It's all parking lots now. They're still talking about maybe doing something there sometime. Not all urban renewal projects went this way. Lincoln Center is an often used example of an urban renewal project done right. Still, you kicked people off land that they were living on, but at least something is there. It's not a parking lot or a new forest. Similarly, Cadman Plaza in Brooklyn is a beautiful park in a much needed area. So we wanted to better understand how urban renewal affected the land that we were talking about in our day-to-day lives working on our project as 596 acres. And we decided, we make maps. Why don't we map these urban renewal sites? Seems obvious. And it kind of was. We weren't the first ones to think of it. Back in 1968, there's this report that has a bunch of really beautiful maps of the city, and it lists all of the urban renewal plans that were in progress or active at the time. And each plan has its own little map. This is actually the area I was just showing you earlier in Queens. Similarly, in 1984, there's this Atlas of Urban Renewal that was released, a little bit more updated. The maps aren't quite as lovely, but they're pretty good. This one has some pretty excellent, very detailed maps where you can actually see parcel by parcel what was taken through eminent domain. Yeah. So these were really helpful as we worked on our project, but we couldn't find any digitized records of what land was used for urban renewal. So what would it take to digitize these maps and put them online? Kind of the process you use working on any project like this. You're getting the data, you're cleaning it up, and you're merging it with other useful data. And since we couldn't find the urban renewal sites anywhere, we decided to foil for them. Foiling is like one of the biggest things we do as a project, 596 acres. One of our staff members is a lawyer, so it's really easy for us to do. So we said, hey, we want all the records you have on urban renewal plans in New York City. And they said, sure, no problem, it's just 10,000 pages and it'll be $0.25 each. We don't really have money to do this kind of thing. We're doing it mostly as volunteers and because we think it's important. So this was not an option for us. Also, who wants all that paper? So we used a provision of the FOIL law that says we can come inspect the records. And we inspected these records for a combined couple hundred of hours with some amazing volunteers who inspected these records with their laptops and copied over every parcel line by line by line. Pretty arduous, for sure. And this is what the paper records look like. Pretty dry legal documents, for sure. But they have these maps which actually show you every single parcel that was included as part of that project. And we ended up with 150 Google spreadsheets, one for each plan, approximately. And they look kind of like this. Alright, these are kind of hard to see, but the most important thing to notice is that we have the borough, we have this number called the block, and we have a number called the lot. And we also, when it was noted in the urban renewal plan, we noted how the parcel was supposed to be used. So here, this one's supposed to be used as a community facility, this one's supposed to be residential, some were earmarked for open space, etc. Why does this keep opening? So thanks again to our amazing volunteers who spent hundreds of hours in the records office at Housing Preservation and Development with their laptops. We ended up with a giant spreadsheet at the end of all of those plans, every single parcel in those plans, which was tens of thousands of parcels. And again, I'll note that we had a borough block and lot number. In New York City, we're lucky enough to have a unique identifier for every parcel in the city. Some cities don't have that, and I feel bad for them. But this makes mapping really easy because we can just join these three numbers to polygons, no problem, really easy. Except when we did it, it kind of went like this. It started off pretty well, and then it just fell down. Because, hey, these parcels don't exist anymore, and these parcels don't exist anymore. We were joining with 2014 shapes, but a lot of these numbers are from the 60s and 50s. So, and this is all kind of the data cleanup side of things. We have scanned tax maps from the 60s. Those are all accessible online in New York. And we could actually kind of rewind back to 65 or 68 or whenever the urban renewal plan was enacted. And you can see here that parcel numbers are just getting crossed out. Sometimes streets are getting crossed out. And we see, in this case, they're all being merged on parcel number 54. So after we copied all of the parcels over into spreadsheets from the paper plans, we had to go back through every single parcel and try to find it on one of these tax maps. And that's what we did, parcel by parcel. It was a lot of time, obviously, but we now have a big shapefile of all of the parcels ever affected by urban renewal in New York City. It doesn't exist in any other digital form that I'm aware of. So we're pretty proud of just having this much. So eventually we made this website, urbanreviewer.org. It looks like this. I want to walk through some of the technical details of how we got here, now that you know where the data came from in more depth than you ever wanted. So we used the JavaScript library called Leaflet. You might have heard of it before. It's open source. It's really quick and easy to use. We made some custom tiles that are pretty hard to see on the screen, but they're really beautiful. And we kept some of the textures from those maps that I showed you from the 1968 report and incorporated those into our map tiles. For this, we're using OpenStreetMap and Mapbox to make these. And that's easy enough that our graphic designer made them. I didn't have to do that, by the way. Not saying anything about graphic designers, but okay. So the next problem we ran into was when you throw around 10,000 polygons on a web map with Leaflet, it gets pretty slow. You can see that you click zoom in, and then a couple of seconds later it actually does zoom in. And this is a common problem with web maps. When you throw up all of your data on them, they start to crawl. Especially, it depends on your browser, obviously. And the other issue was that we wanted to do a lot of stuff with this data. So we wanted to list all the plans, as you can see on the right here. We wanted to outline the plans. So we wanted to add these dotted lines around them to show you the full extent of that particular plan, because the plans aren't necessarily contiguous. So you need some way of representing that. And we also wanted to search for plans and highlight particular parcels. So we're kind of asking a lot of this data, and we couldn't actually put it all up on our map. So we ended up going with a system called CartoDB. Is this a thing people are aware of? Can I get a show of hands by any chance? Awesome, great. So what's going on here, I've erased the base map, so you can no longer see the Mapbox tiles. This is just the CartoDB shapes. So we threw all our data into a system called CartoDB, and it basically creates tiles for you out of your data. This means you're just loading raster tiles, you're not loading the individual vectors. So it's super fast, and you have all of your data here. Potential problem with having all of your data rendered as raster tiles is interacting with that data, because they're just raster tiles now. And I'll get to that in a second, but these are kind of the three main components of what we were working on. I already listed them for you, but here's a quick summary. So, making it actually interactive with CartoDB, we heavily used something called their SQL API, and it basically works like this. You say, hey, can you tell me something, CartoDB? And I just give you an SQL query. So if you know SQL, it's pretty easy to make this happen. And they respond like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. And here's either JSON, which works great in web applications generally, or it's GeoJSON, which is great for throwing it on a map. So if it's spatial, you can throw it on a map. If it's not spatial, if it's like a count, you can incorporate that into your web app. So, for example, for searching, as you're typing here, the web application, urbanreviewer.org, actually doesn't know anything about the urban renewal plans. It's, as you're typing, it's asking CartoDB, hey, what has LINC in it? And the code looks like this, but really what it comes down to is this select statement that got cut off, unfortunately. Sorry about that. But you're selecting all of the names of plans where the name contains the search string, right? The next thing that I mentioned was we wanted to do these outlines around the individual plans. When you're doing this, again, the web application itself doesn't know anything about the plans or the geometries or anything like that. As you put your mouse over one of these, it asks CartoDB, hey, what plan am I over, and what shape should I put on the map for it? And this is actually pretty short code, but it comes down to, in PostGIS, which is what CartoDB runs on top of, you can use spatial functions, so you can collect the geometries using a union, you can make a convex hole out of them, and then you can buffer around them, and you get back just a simple GeoJSON shape that you can throw on your map. Actually, is relatively straightforward. I won't say easy, but it's doable. The next thing, this is kind of it in action again. So you can see as you put the mouse over the plan list there on the right, you can see the same thing happening on the map to the left. It's all the same system. Similarly, right, as you put your mouse over the parcels, they get highlighted over here, and vice versa. As you put your mouse over the parcels, they get highlighted, and it shows you which one you're talking about. And that's also happening with the SQL API. It's pretty brilliant. If you know SQL and a little bit of JavaScript, you can do a whole lot with this. We also did some dynamic styles. So when you click on publicly owned and vacant today, which was kind of the whole reason we started this project in the first place, that little checkbox, you can kind of see from here, but you should probably check out the site later, but they turn brown. Some of them turn like a goldish brown. And that's, again, the web app doesn't know anything about the plans or the shapes or anything. We just ask CartoDB to change the style of some of them, and CartoDB uses a styling language called CartoCSS. So you just say set the CartoCSS, change these ones to brown. Finally, I think this is the last one. So you can change which data is shown in your CartoDB tiles by, so in this case, we're using this time slider. So you can actually see decade by decade where urban renewal happened. You can see how quick this actually happens. you might expect this to be slow since we're unloading one raster layer and loading another one, but it actually happens really quickly. And all you're doing is setting SQL on this layer. So you're saying just, okay, now just show me the plans between 1952 and 1960. And it does that for you. So in summary, you can have it both ways. You can show all your data and interact with it. And that was my big takeaway from working on this project. Here are some close-ups, so you can see this is in an area of the city. It's Cobble Hill / Red Hook, but you can kind of see some of these plans. These brown ones, these are publicly owned and vacant today, so these were cleared for urban renewal. Nothing's happened on them since. Here's some up in the Bronx. A decent number of the parcels that were cleared for urban renewal are still vacant. And of course down in the Rockaways, which I already showed a few times, but it's pretty staggering. And you can check all of this out at your leisure at urbanreviewer.org. There are more details here. You can find the slides here, they're all online. And so you'll be able to click on these links, but for Carter to Be, I wrote a blog post talking more about how this works. If you're interested in the code, it's on GitHub. And again, I'm on Twitter at @ebrosfred. Thanks.
I don't see any of the other presenters for this session yet. I think we have plenty of time for questions. So, have at it. Do you have any questions?
Hi. Yeah. So the question was, is it too early for any outcomes? No, it's not. That urban renewal, Edgemere Urban Renewal Park, turned into a farm, basically. Yeah. There are some parcels in the Bronx that we've been able to use the fact that they were part of urban renewal plans as leverage to get communities to have access to them. So yeah, no, it's definitely real time and something we're actively using. Also, I forgot to mention it. I should have mentioned it. But at the Queens Museum in New York, we had a big exhibit. The Queens Museum contains a thing called the Panorama, which is a scale model of the entire city. It's crazy. But we were able to put little flags for each urban renewal plan on it, and we had a show there. So that's another outcome. Hi. Yeah, the question was who funded the project. That's another thing I should have mentioned. So we mostly worked on volunteer labor, which I'm not a big fan of, but sometimes that's what happens. We had a small amount of funding from a company called SmartSign, which I should have mentioned, smartsign.com. They make signs, as the name suggests, but they kind of pitched the idea of sponsoring one of our projects, so we took them up on that. Hi.
What is the range in time from the first to the last of the projects that are urban renewal?
Yeah, so maybe surprisingly, there are urban renewal projects that have been activated very recently. I might as well just open it up while I have a second. But they went back to, I think it was 1952, sorry. So that's why we have a time slider. So if you go back to 52, you can see these plans were active then. And I should be able to drag this over. Right. I think that there's some Okay, never mind. So the one I'm thinking of, Willets Point, Willets Point. So this was actually adopted in 2008, which is pretty recent in my book. Yeah, not as recent as I thought it was, but 2008. Yeah. And I forgot to mention that as you click on each plan, you get some details here. And we also post, if they were in either of those reports that I mentioned earlier, we have some of the original pages from those reports. Hi. So if I'm understanding the question, it's as part of urban renewal, was the city looking to improve utilities? That's a great question. From what I understand, no. It was most of them were marked for residential use. So it was mostly like, we're knocking down these homes and we're going to build better homes. I'm sure there were times where it was used to help build water mains and things like that, but that's not the overriding use of it, for sure. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for that.
Okay. Well, thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
We have one of our presenters here, so we'll move on to the next presentation.
Great.
So thank you very much.
No problem.
And get things saved here. Our